Unpacking Equity in Michigan's Academic and Workforce Programs. You can see our agenda. I have some framing that I want to do, and then I'm going to turn it over to our friends from CCRC, and then we will be breaking out to discuss some of the things that you'll hear about in the session and coming together for a quick debrief at the end of our approximately 90-minute session. So that's kind of what this is going to look like. I'm joined by, as always, by my awesome colleagues from MCSS. Erica, Katie, and Precious, I think, are all on the line today. And we are excited actually to get started with this series, which really kicks off more than one of our projects and focus areas that we'll be looking at over the next 2 to 3 years. Today we have with us our friends from CCRC, our frequent guests and collaborators, our co-conspirators in many ways. Davis Jenkins, I know, is familiar to all of you, and Hannah has been with us a number of times. We also have John Fink on the line and Sue Bickerstaff. So we have a good representation from our friends at CCRC. And if you would be so kind as to rename yourself to include your college, because we will be going to breakout rooms, and it's just more helpful for people to be able to see where a person is from if they're speaking with them. You can do it from the participant list. You can also do it by going to the corner of your square there in your Hollywood Squares, and you can rename yourself from there as well. And I'm going to do that right now, since I forgot to do it earlier.
Sorry, this is Scott Behrens. I'm joining from phone. Is there a way to rename yourself on the phone?
Gosh, I don't think so.
I can rename Scott. I can put in a name for you. What name and what school?
Scott and Monroe County Community College.
I will do that now.
Great.
Thank you.
You're off. Thank you.
All right. We have a lot of people on the line today, and some of you may not be, some of you may way too familiar with us at the MCSS. Maybe you've joined us for several meetings in the last like 4 or 5 days, but for those of you who have not, we are an entity that is housed in the Michigan Community College Association. We provide state level support to all of the 28 public community colleges in Michigan. Which you can see located here on our state, which really should be like covering with that blue radar snow, I think, for this this season. Katie, can we work that out, a new graphic? We run a lot of initiatives. I referred to them as kind of an alphabet soup of initiatives. We have the VFA and the My Best and the My Start to Finish, Guided Pathways, RM at RT. And we do the best that we can to try to bring them together and focus them around the idea and the ideals of really guided pathways. Guided pathways has been an organizing principle for us across all of these initiatives over the past 5 or 6 years. And so you'll hear more today about how guided pathways is continuing to shape the work that we are planning to do in the next 2-3 years. So what's this series about? We're launching several new initiatives in humanities, liberal arts, and workforce programs. They're going to have 4 strategies, which are going to strengthen equitable pathways to and through the programs, whether they're intended to lead to transfer or whether they're going to lead directly into the workforce. So in this series of 4 exploratory webinars, and I'm going to show you the topics of the other ones in just a moment, we're going to be introducing the building blocks of this next frontier of the work and the relationship with guided pathways. In the early summer of 2021, a time I devoutly hope hastens along, the colleges will have the opportunity to commit to some deeper work in their selected programs in partnership with MCSS using these building blocks. So basically, this is an opportunity for us to kind of preview, explore a bit of what's going to be important in these upcoming initiatives, and then we will, as the months go on, be able to invite you into deeper work on these initiatives. And just wanting to re-up the conversation about equity as we are in the midst of Black History Month. A little tidbit of not very pleasant data about the students that earn certificates or associate degrees within 6 years, only 20%. But there's a significant equity gap, as only 7.3% of 10,500 Black students earned any award since enrolling in 2012. So I will leave that with you. That's going to be important. That's going to be at the center of our work, closing those gaps. It's not just Black students. That one just happened to be one of the most significant, but there are other gaps as well that we will be looking to close in this work. The remaining programs in this webinar series include the next one on March 5th. I'll show you this slide again at the end, and you can find all of these programs available to register for on our MCCA events page, your friendly resource for all things MCSS. So we'll be looking at state and local wage data related to our programs of study. We'll be looking at labor market skills and credentials in April. And in May, we'll be talking about how faculty can promote equitable participation in academic and workforce programs. And you can see how we are working in this series to make sure that we are bringing together the idea that although programs intended to prepare students for the workforce and programs that are intended to prepare students for transfer do have unique characteristics and needs, a lot of the issues are more similar than you might think. So that kind of stay alert for that message throughout this series as well. I'm going to pause and see here if there's any questions so far, and I'm also going to invite John from CCRC to share his slides, and also for the CCR team to introduce themselves as they come up in the presentation.
Thanks, Jenny. So this is Davis Jenkins from CCRC, and I'm going to give a brief overview of what we've learned from our research on guided pathways to address this task that you guys are, well, you've been doing it, but now more concertedly to build more equitable pathways to college and career success for students. So next slide. So this guided pathways has become a national movement. There are 400 colleges that are part of formal state and national pathways reforms efforts. Michigan was among the first, and I remember at the time talking to Chris Baldwin and others saying people were expressing skepticism about Michigan, and I'm going, you don't go to Michigan and express skepticism about Michigan, by the way, but because it's a decentralized state. And as it turns out, what we found is, you know, that some of these ideas are global, but really to make them happen for students, obviously they have to happen from the ground up. And actually not having a state office, you know, telling you what to do, and an MCCA supporting you as advocates. I think we think Michigan has made as much progress as anyone in the country. So to hell with you Michigan skeptics. By the way, I'm in Chicago, so you guys in the north can thank me for the snow that I sent to you yesterday. Next slide. So we've been studying 120 colleges, including a handful in Michigan nationally, that are implementing pathways and come up with all this stuff. Not even my mom has read even most of it. And we've learned a lot along the way. Next slide. Since we published Redesigning, where after all, it was just a sort of a vague idea, a hypothesis that was, it's like all research is supposed to, you're welcome, Janice. I take Bitcoin too, Janice, so no, sometimes I'd drive to Michigan to get that lake effect, but Jenny says it didn't happen. So anyhow, so we've learned a lot. And these are some of the big learnings that we've had. I mean, back then and for a long time, we've been interested in improving community college, completion of community college programs, and addressing equity gaps. But more and more, we see that we need to focus not just completion on any programs, but on high opportunity programs, which we define as programs that either lead to a good job directly and or transfer with junior standing in a major. And this is a key equity thing. Not only do we need to achieve equity in rates of credential completion, we need to ensure that underserved students are getting into and through high opportunity programs. And one thing I think we've neglected in all this, and the CTE people, but the humanities people, everyone knows this, it's about motivation. We think so many students aren't completing programs because they're just not, they don't see a path that's toward a goal that's motivating for them. Speaking of paths, we made a lot of deal about the importance of mapping, and you guys dutifully did probably too much mapping. Again, we didn't know what we were doing. We found mapping was most useful when it brought together people from humanities and CTE and advisors and faculty, people who don't usually talk or may not talk in a college, to talk about the student learning experience in and outside of the classroom. But the key thing is to have not just maps, which are guides, but every student on a customized educational plan. That means early on, we've seen a lot of great work among colleges helping students explore career and academic options much more than we have, and we've seen some great examples of this from Michigan than maybe 10 years ago from community college. But more and more, it's not just providing information and helping with that kind of advising. It's a very important. More and more, we see the importance of engaging, helping students connect with faculty, advisors, students, alumni, people in a field that they're interested in from the start. I mean, it's always been about engagement for student completion, Vince Tinto, but he was talking about students at Syracuse University. At a community college, students are going to be engaged and therefore retained and motivated to complete when they're around people who are, into the same stuff that they are. Again, we see this in CTE. You can see the healthcare people all have uniforms, but, this is also true of the theater people and social science nerds like me, You also find out if you don't like social science nerds like Davis, and that can be useful too. We focused a lot on, improving prerequisite remediation, but we think there needs to be a big mindset change, and we're seeing this from helping students get ready for college algebra and English to really teaching students to be confident learners across program foundation courses through active learning. And I think my colleagues are going to mention a key piece of research, not from CCRC on this. And then finally, from Julie Wong, this book called On My Own, about the importance of active learning. And this maybe is among the most important things for equity too, for really giving underserved students who may not have had rich teaching that confidence in moving ahead. This is critical. And then, this idea of, guided pathways initially talked about students post-high school and high school dual enrollment. It used to be more sort of ad hoc. Now we're thinking of applying these practices to dual enrollment students to help them get on an on-ramp. So in summary, next slide, the most important things for the work that you guys are doing and in general for colleges, and by the way, we think these are going to be important for community colleges as the competition is going to get even fiercer, state funding even less. God love you in Michigan, The less they give you, the more you do. But so backward designing programs to ensure that all students, but especially underserved students, are in programs that lead either to good jobs, that is jobs that pay $17 an hour and up, plus benefits and provide opportunities for learning and further education, and where ideally your employer will pay you to get your bachelor's degree and master's, or transfer with junior standing in a major. And the Associate of Arts in Gen Ed is not that degree. Academic and career exploration, help every student get a preliminary plan by the end of the first term. It'll change. And if they're going to transfer, it's as important to know what they're thinking of majoring in as it is the university. And then these two things on the bottom, the research is saying, I mean, the top two are more structural, let's say. They're important, but most important, and we think most important for equity, is connecting students early on with people who are interested, the drone people, the theater people, people who are interested in healthcare and in working with children, connecting early on from orientation and on through to help students with this exploration process and, really to provide them with network of support in a field they're interested in. And they may decide, like I said, to change fields, and that's fine if you do it early. And then ensuring that every student has a light the fire learning experience. I know that sounds woo-woo to you Michiganders. Again, I'm from Chicago, it does to me too. But the research is definitive on this. And I mentioned Julie Wong's work. There's a lot of research from NSF on college learning about the importance of active and experiential learning, especially from the start, because we lose so many students from the start. So that's sort of a broad overview. Now I'll turn it over to John and Hannah to talk about some of the tools. Well, okay. Oops, I missed one more slide. Sorry. Can you do that? So just to remind us, in terms of how you go about doing this, organizing yourselves in cross-silo inquiry and success teams by academic and career community, what we in the book called meta majors. Look at using the kinds of tools and approaches that John's going to talk about, your current enrollment to see which students are or are not in a high opportunity program, and develop strategies that are going to be multifaceted for helping students get into humanities on a path to a bachelor's in humanities, and to also sell the humanities and introduce the humanities for students in CTE programs, because they're going to need bachelor's degrees eventually too. Review the first term curriculum, as Hannah's going to talk about, to make sure you got your best teachers up there teaching a course. Again, it doesn't have to be, it can be a humanities course. The course that turned me on as freshman year was a sociology of religion course. Help all students develop a first program plan, and then to the extent you can, do all of these things 1 through 5 with your dual enrollment students. Okay, that's the broad overview. I'm going to turn it over to John and then Hannah to talk about some tools that will hopefully make concrete.
Guess what? I had an assessment today.
All right, thanks, Davis. Hey, everyone.
We had an assessment today.
Good to be here with you all. I think there's someone that probably intends to be muted right now that maybe is not, but so a lot of the student success work and, intention of guided pathways reforms is really around, increasing success, improving completion rates generally. And I think in a really important complement to that is to ask this question, almost back to the access, issues, years ago of, completion of what and access to what, and really, what are these pathways leading to? And really, who's completing in these different programs. And so this past year, we wrote this brief, just laying out some of these key questions to get started really thinking through, what are programs, which students are in which programs, and where are the issues around proportionality and representation when we look at who's in what sort of programs, and layer on sort of like what did they lead to in terms of further opportunity. So I'm going to first share some research, sort of motivating those questions, and then talk through the questions that we lay out in this brief, as well as sort of a data tool an Excel template that we have posted to our website that helps to sort of get these conversations started. The first thing is just when we think about, further opportunity from college, on a large scale. One common way that the folks at Georgetown Center for Education on the Workforce have thought about this is sort of like trying to get good jobs, which they define as sort of folks earning basically 40 grand and up, sort of in their prime working age, and they're looking at sort of what sort of college credentials are leading to these good jobs over time. First thing you see is that this is like a bachelor's degree sort of thing going on for the most part in terms of where the growth has been, what's been relatively safe during economic downturns. So obviously, and we know a lot of community college students are seeking a bachelor's or graduate degree when they enter. So, if we think about sort of further opportunity, sorry. Okay, I think I'm back. If we think about further opportunity, transfer has to be a huge part of that. But that said, looking at sub-baccalaureate credentials, certificates and associate degrees, also, a good number of those do lead to, these good jobs or sort of further opportunity, but not all, as I'll sort of show in a few slides. The other thing, so that's from the degree or credential end, but of course, that is just a representation of what students learn and what sort of skills and competencies they develop at the college. We also know that, basically the degree is not enough. It might get you in the door, get you to the interview, but it's really through networking, connections, and actually the skills that students have. And so I think, here's from a similar source, just think, there's a lot of information here, but these are all the, what the employers are looking for, these top skills. And I think these will sort of ring true. But I want to say that, more so than just the degrees itself, what are the sort of skills that students and the networks that they're building across those degree programs. So when you think through like what programs and what further opportunity does it lead to, it's not just about the credential itself, but of course the learning and the curriculum that students gain through completing that credential. So in terms of completion rates overall, as we heard in the intro, just completion rates nationally and in Michigan in most states are low. If you look at, this is from the National Student Clearinghouse, looking 6 years out among an entering cohort of students, community college students, first time in college, fewer than half are completing any sort of college award within 6 years. Not an insignificant amount, about like 10% or 15% are still enrolled 6 years later. A lot of students are just not enrolled. And then if you look at which sort of awards students are completing, it sort of breaks down between whether they're transferring and completing at a 4-year or completing something at the community college. So outcomes are low overall. Looking nationally, we see these, substantial and sort of hard to budge equity gaps, both by race and income. Here we're showing race. I wrote an op-ed in Inside Higher Ed yesterday talking about sort of the underperforming transfer system, and sort of underperforming as it is, it's still working twice as well for white students as it is for Black students, for instance. So, we have these low inequitable completion rates. But I think that is a big challenge. And when we think about like what are the programs leading to, we're looking among completers. So it's always important when you're thinking about like what programs are leading to, what who's completing, to sort of just also know that a lot of students aren't completing anything. So I think we sort of have to hold all these things together. And as we'll talk about further, indeed, we think, and the research suggests that these two things are related, that one potential driver of non-completion is sort of the lack of relevance, or why should I continue? What is this leading to? Sort of questions. So one area of our research at CCRC that we've sort of focused on in terms of unpacking what's going on behind these low completion rates is just like ways that we can measure sort of in the short term predictors of longer term success. So building on sort of research on students' early academic momentum, things like completing more credits in the first year, first term, completing sort of key gateway courses like math and English, and sort of persisting. We found that students who are meeting those early momentum points are much more likely sort of in the long term to complete to transfer and complete any sort of college award. And that, that's sort of a student level analysis, but it's really important from the college level because, if you think about a 6-year outcome, that's so like distant into the future. If we do something next year, how are we going to know if it's making a difference? And especially if we don't have a comparison group, at our college, if we're going to do something different for everybody at the college, how do we know if it's making an impact? And our research has pointed to these early momentum metrics really as reliable leading indicators of longer term change on these outcomes. And this has been important for sort of improvements overall, but especially for also closing equity gaps on these long-term outcomes, which also can feel like very distant. How are we going to affect those long-term low and inequitable outcomes? But indeed, what we find is that, in order to close gaps in the long term, we need to close them in the short term. And actually that these racial equity gaps emerge right away in the first term and first year on these early measures of momentum. And we, in a follow-up study, or just a few months ago with Yushin Lin and Maggie Fay, we did statewide analysis looking at how these inequities play out among an entering community college cohort over up to 10 years. And we found that, among all students, those who completed some of these early credit and gateway course benchmarks were much more likely to transfer and complete a bachelor's. But specifically for Black and Latinx students and low-income students, there was actually additional benefits of those early milestones, suggesting that by closing those gaps on the shorter measures, that could be a really promising strategy for closing them in the long term. Where we need to know more about, these are all these momentum metrics are focused on general momentum, but where we have more question marks is how do we operationalize this idea of like early momentum into a program of study that students are sort of declaring, entering a program and sort of progressing into that program. It's a lot more difficult to measure this when we, in our typical data sets, is all sort of discussed. But we think this is really sort of important because this speaks to sort of the relevance and how sort of connected the students' interest is around their motivation for further, persisting further and completing. This is also something that sort of in related work with the Michigan colleges, we're going to sort of work on and learn together, specifically looking at the humanities transfer pathways. So we're really excited about that. So one of the reasons it's hard to operationalize program momentum, especially when we're talking about transfer intending students, is that like, what even is the transfer program? And a lot of times, at the typical community college, it's sort of more of a placeholder or a general bucket where students are placed into if they have some sort of transfer intention. And really the responsibility is on the student, with support from the institution, but basically placed on the student to figure out their transfer pathway, to sort of cobble together. You might think of it as like a DIY transfer degree. Just pick your courses, and if you are enterprising enough to figure out the right website or the right person to talk to at the university, then your courses will probably transfer and apply to your bachelor's degree program. But that's sort of the status quo way. And a lot of colleges have transfer supports, but oftentimes students are sort of on their own. One CESI survey found that only half of community college transfer students are actually seeking out any sort of transfer advising or services at the college. So a lot of students are trying to figure this out from notoriously difficult websites. One study finding that the websites and articulation agreements require sort of like a 16th grade reading level to interpret. So it's very challenging to navigate this. And we think that the sort of lack of clear transfer pathways and programs essentially places that responsibility on students. And so when this is part of some analysis from the Maricopa Community College District in Arizona that sort of motivated this brief on unpacking program enrollments, what they did is they just looked at what programs all of their students are in. And if you look at that at a typical community college, one of the largest buckets is just the general Associates of Arts for transfer. But really within that bucket, there's students who are have varied goals for transfer. They might want to get a biology bachelor's degree. They might want to get an English bachelor's degree or transfer to Arizona State or Northern Arizona University. So I think a lot of this work that we're sort of presenting is thinking through like who's actually in these buckets, and are these programs, what do they lead to, and are they sort of specific enough in preparing students for success? I wrote a haiku about this bucket as someone who looks at these data a lot, the Associates of Arts. Typically, these students will have the federal classification of instructional programs for SIP code 24, because it's sort of the general liberal arts transfer SIP code. And so I was wondering, SIP code 24, am I in the humanities or just hanging out? Because sometimes that 24 can be included in humanities courses. So what's interesting is when you look at these transfer students and when they enroll at universities, as the Maricopa colleges did, the students who are going to their top transfer destinations in Arizona, the programs that they're enrolled in are more sort of like specific bachelor's degree programs like business, psychology, biology. So this has sort of evolved with statewide transfer reforms around creating more structured transfer pathway or sort of field aligned associate degrees. And we sort of have seen, this in terms of creating opportunity within the transfer pathway to create more structured pathways that are going to result in students having more of their credits not just transfer, but apply to their eventual bachelor's degree program. That's really important because, basically the value of one of the biggest awards of community colleges, the General Associates of Transfer, is basically contingent on the student completing a bachelor's degree. And too few students even that earn the Associates for Transfer are completing a bachelor's degree. And one of the big impediments, as this research shows, is credit loss in sort of misaligned transfer pathways. This research finding that students who are able to transfer most of their credits, not only did they sort of save more money and time, but they're also 2.5 times more likely to complete a bachelor's degree. So there really is a stratification. We'll talk about the workforce programs in terms of leading to lower, medium, or high paying jobs. But even in the transfer programs, there's a stratification of opportunity that's really important to pay attention to. All right, so let's talk about workforce programs. Basically, the point here is just that, if you look at the set of workforce programs at a college, which vary by both the subject and the length, they lead to varied labor market returns in terms of what you could expect to earn in industry based on those credentials. Back looking from the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, who looked at a nationally representative sample, just sort of detailed how different types of associate's degree lead to different levels of earnings. So there's a lot of information on the slide, but you can sort of generally see by subject area, if you think more of the applied associates in engineering, healthcare are associated with higher earnings, and a lot are sort of under that 40,000 threshold that they identify for good jobs. When we just tried to sort of map this to the IPEDS data from Michigan colleges, it's a rough estimate, but that's around 1/3 of the associate degrees awarded by Michigan community colleges are in topics, according to this data, above that 40,000 threshold, meaning that about 2/3 aren't. Many of those are the transfer associates. But the point here is just that there's differences. Not all associate degrees are created equally. And you could say the same with certificates as well. Here, even more of a stratification, with some certificates associated with much higher earnings and others less so. And a similar sort of picture here in Michigan, as the case in many states, that it's relatively small proportion of these awards that are the ones leading to the better jobs. So I think this raises the question in terms of opportunity within the workforce programs, which programs are leading to higher and lower paying jobs. So these are the 3 basic questions we outlay. I'm going to talk about our brief and the associated tools. What programs are our students in? Which programs lead to greater and lesser opportunity? And is the representation proportionate across these programs? One of the sort of things that we advanced in this brief to sort of get thinking and frame this conversation around post-graduation opportunity, which admittedly is a very complex and messy issue and very locally dependent and could include a lot of things, like there's a lot of reasons folks attend college. But we tried to put some bounds on it to think about, what would this look like thinking about workforce programs? What would this look like thinking about transfer programs and what other sort of programs there are? So we sort of detailed this way of categorizing programs that we have found to be useful in terms of thinking through the programs that colleges offer. The first, just looking at the workforce programs is, and this is sort of building off of work done in the Washington state system, it's just sort of breaking these up into workforce programs that lead to relatively low, medium, or higher paying jobs, which when we did this analysis in Washington and other colleges have done this, they've actually connected to labor market earnings or wage data among graduates among these different programs, and just sort of split them up into 3 groups. In Washington, they had some bounds around like what that actually meant in terms of like a relative or equivalent hourly wage. But obviously that's going to be pretty context dependent on the local area, but it gives you a sense of that, some of these programs, do lead to higher earning jobs and careers while others don't. And so having that way to categorize them is really useful in thinking through, what are all the programs that the college offers. But also within transfer, we talked about how opportunity is stratified within transfer, and the differentiation we're making here is just between sort of structured and unstructured transfer. Unstructured sort of being the status quo, business as usual transfer, which is the general associates of arts, where students may be able to, sort of on their own, or if they seek out help, construct the right set of courses that are going to apply all to a major, but that's not necessarily the default. Whereas the structured transfer programs are sort of pre-designed by the colleges and partner universities, or oftentimes coordinated by the states to specifically align those courses within at least a broad field of study. Oftentimes you see these like the biology pathway or the Tennessee transfer pathway in this particular subject. So I know this is sort of ongoing work. They also might specify a specific 4-year destination as well. But essentially the difference here is the institutions in the state and the systems have taken the responsibility of sort of figuring out which courses are aligned and then presenting that to students. It's also important to mention that when we do these analyses looking at what program students are enrolled in, we really encourage folks to take a broad view of who's enrolled at the college, to think through, students in non-credit programs, students who are maybe unknown or unclassified, and why is that the case, and who are these students, and what more information do we need on them to sort of get that we might be able to sort of bridge them into one of these programs leading to further opportunity. So we also know that there are just like sort of missing records, unknown, undeclared program intention sort of becomes conflated. Dual enrollment, oftentimes that's like its own program. But that also raises further questions around who are those students, what are they seeking, what courses are they taking, and are they aware of the programmatic pathways offered through the college? I think a lot of times folks sort of write off that population as just taking some courses and then they're going to go to university after high school, which may be the case, but we also see real efforts by colleges to help dual enrollment students explore and build a plan through a program of study through the college that they may continue after high school. So let me tell you about this Excel tool. I'll share the link. That really, these are big questions. They really require a wide group of stakeholders from the college, including students, to really think through what programs lead to what and who's in what programs. But we thought that a useful way to get started is just sort of begin looking at the data and disaggregating the data. And in this Excel tool, it just sort of populates a series of pivot tables and charts where the college, you all can like load in just a student list of for every student what program they are enrolled in, basic sort of student demographic and information, and then you can sort of use different ways to categorize the programs based on that that categorization scheme around like workforce and transfer programs that I was talking about, or your divisions or meta majors. But once you sort of upload your list, it populates these tables. And we like these tree map diagrams because it just gives you like a snapshot of all the programs. And this is like fictionalized data, but it's pretty similar. It's sort of built off of a real college. And you see just a lot of students are in this like orange bucket, transfer, unstructured, general, liberal arts. But then you also see some students are in more structured transfer pathways. And then, you know, there's a mix of smaller programs grouped into those workforce, low, medium, and high, as well as a pretty large bucket in these unknown, undeclared. And you'll see that the pivot table also allows you to sort of segment your student population by different characteristics like race, age, gender, other things you can add in there. We like using Microsoft Excel, not only because some of our work is funded by the Gates Foundation, but also because it's a tool that just everyone has. And you know, it's pretty easy to sort of build and customize and you know, improve these basic templates. The other part of this tool that I'll just call out briefly that is also a useful way to look at programs is this tab where it just like goes through your top 20 program and, you know, top 20 programs enrolled at the college, and then just simply gives a breakdown, like a composition of the program by, you know, students' race, by student gender, age, other sort of information that you put in there. And here you can compare it to the college overall. And in the updated version of this that I'll share the link, it has like a table view where you can look at like percentages and just see, you know, having in mind what these programs lead to, which there's a way to filter for that up top. But having that in mind, you can just see like what does the demographic representation look like across these programs? Is it proportionate to the college overall or not? And like I said, this is really just a beginning point for further conversations around, you know, what might be going on here, what could explain these things, to what extent is this a product of sort of inequitable practices or policies at the college, and how can those be addressed? All right, looks like some good discussion in the chat, so I'll tune into that, but otherwise I'm gonna pass it over to Hannah.
All right, thank you, John. All right, so hi everyone. I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit about onboarding. So I was just thinking this morning, and it was 2 years ago that I was in Michigan, or it was almost 2 years ago that I was in Michigan for some Guided Pathways Institutes, and I was talking about why making educational plans is so important. And you know, since then we've done a lot more research, and I think we have some more. We've developed some more guidance on how do you get to that point where you're helping students make educational plans. What does that process look like? How do you help them choose a program and make connections with advisors and faculty members who can actually help students through that process of making educational plans? So I'm going to talk about that today. So the first part is kind of like finding this purpose, and then with kind of the goal of helping students make an educational plan, with the, you know, the acknowledgement that, you know, most students' plans are going to change probably pretty soon after they first make it, because they change their mind about their program or they withdrew from classes. And I do realize there's a lot of logistics involved in making and creating plans. But even if you can just get students with an initial plan, even if it's on paper or in Excel or a Word doc, like it's a good start, because then you have something to go from moving forward. So next slide, please, John. So we are really focused on the first year, onboarding, making plans, because so many students leave after their first year. This is some data from one state we work with, and what you could see, term 5 here, this is the start of year 2 in this state. And you could see that 40% of students are not enrolled. They didn't complete any degree, not even a certificate. Whoops. John, I think so. There we go. They didn't complete anything, and they're just gone from higher education completely. So that's a real bummer. And we think that part of the reason for that is that because students are not helped to find this purpose. They're not helped to see what is the connection between the courses that they're taking, what they're studying, what they're learning, and how this is going to help them achieve their goals, whether that is getting a job right after completing a community college degree or transferring. You can't see kind of the big picture and the longer term path or plan. And so they're leaving higher education. So for that reason, we are really focused on redesigning onboarding in the first year. And when we talk about onboarding, we're thinking of this as a really long-term process that extends through the first year. So it starts before students apply, through orientation, through the first semester, and even into the second semester or into the second term. And a student is really onboarded when they feel this sense of connection to the college. They feel a sense of a belonging, that they're part of a community, that they have a plan and they can see a path forward. So next slide, please. So we did some research with students at a few community colleges down in Florida to hear from them about what they wanted during the onboarding experience. So they really wanted some help exploring their academic and career interests. So oftentimes we focus on students who say they're undecided, but really all students want to talk about their goals and what they're interested in exploring. So it's something that's really important to build into every student's experience, before orientation, during the first year. And kind of it's not a one and done type thing, but this ongoing process. They want information on program options in their fields of interest and the connections to career opportunities. So giving them some information on these programs of study and how this is going to help them achieve their goals. They're looking for opportunities to interact with faculty members in their field of study, with other students, including current students and maybe some older students who have some experience in this program, to talk about their academic and career interests. They want to take a course on the topics of interest in their first term. And they do like building these full program academic plans. Students told us in this research and also some previous research that John and Davis did in the city colleges of Chicago, talked about how much they liked having a plan, being able to monitor their own progress on their plan. And it was really motivating for these students to be able to see, like, if they're looking at a bar chart of like their progress, seeing it kind of like fill up every semester and that they're closer to their goals. And one thing we also learned is that students who don't have clear goals need different kinds of support than those who do not. So it's really important to target supports and to make these more personalized and individualized to students, because there's not one type of support that's going to work for every student. And I'm actually working on a paper now with one of our other colleagues, Serena Klumpen, about how colleges in Ohio are using some of the big guided pathways structures like meta majors and program maps to target and provide personalized support for students. So like doing onboarding and orientation within a meta major and things like that. So that paper will be coming out later this spring. So next slide, John. So this is this book that Davis mentioned earlier. It's called On My Own. It's by Julie Wong, who's a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And one of the takeaways here that I want to highlight is that her research found that transfer students reported that having these active learning experiences in their field of interest really was a key motivator in helping them persist in their field of interest. So she found the connection, and you can't really see it on this slide, but that graphic on the picture on the right shows that students in active learning reported higher transfer self-efficacy and a more and greater intent to transfer. So we do see some connections, and this kind of highlights the importance of getting students into active learning experiences, especially in their field of study. Next slide. And so this connects to, there we go. This connects to then questions about like what courses are students taking in their first semester. We want them to be engaged in a program. We want them to take a course in their program to get them, jazzed about the field of study, meeting faculty in their field, meeting peers in their field, also seeing if this is a good fit for based on their interests and their goals or not, because it's better to figure that out earlier rather than later. So we've been doing this exercise lately, and this is really easy to replicate at your college, but you could look by program of study and see what are the students in this program taking? What courses are they taking in their first term? And you could look at the second term as well. And by and large, when we do this across different states with, at this point, I think we've done it with a couple hundred colleges, we see really similar patterns, and it looks similar to what's on this slide. So most often students are taking Dev Ed Math, Dev Ed English. They're taking sometimes a college student success course. They might be taking a psychology course. Often they're taking a gym course. Those are kind of the most common courses that we see students taking in their first term. And so if we're thinking like, well, is this going to get students, you know, feeling like they're part of a community, feeling like they're part of a program, that they're learning stuff that's going to apply to their field and their goals? The answer is probably not. So then the question is, what are the barriers to getting students into courses, into program courses in their first term? And a lot of times the barriers are Dev Ed courses, but another one is, you know, the idea is that students should maybe take their gen eds, get your gen eds out of the way. I was an academic advisor for a while, and you know, I would tell students to do that, you know, because you think, well, get them out of the way, they'll all transfer. We know they do not now. So, you know, it's kind of this shift in mindset, but you have to give advisors tools to help them create better first term schedules for students, help them get them in these courses and remove some of these barriers that are keeping students from entering these courses in their first term. So next slide, and this gets to this idea that we talked about earlier about like lighting the fire. So this is all really related, but you know, in addition to giving students some exposure to these courses, it's also an opportunity for faculty to kind of like show off to students. Why is this field cool? You know, what are students going to learn? At that Guided Pathways Institute I was at 2 years ago, there was a presentation on threshold concepts, which I thought was awesome because it gets students thinking in this way that's kind of relevant to this field of study. Like you just sort of, you learn these ways of thinking in these fields, and that's an opportunity. These Light the Fire courses, program courses, it's an opportunity to do that. So it can expose students to these foundational concepts, theories, information about a discipline. What are the potential careers that you could do with this field that students probably aren't even thinking about? So, and then again, an opportunity to incorporate some active learning opportunities. Next slide. So all this kind of fits under this umbrella of onboarding redesign. So we did come up with some exercises based on these three kind of goals of onboarding, with the, you know, helping students explore their program options and interests, gaining academic momentum in a program of interest, so getting into those program courses, and developing an educational plan. So we have some tools on our website that can help with this, kind of help you think through this redesign process, and how can we help students do these three things, and how can we do it at scale for all students in all programs of study, acknowledging that that experience, that onboarding experience, isn't going to look the same for every student, but these are kind of the principles or the ideas that we're hoping that we can expose students to. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who's going to kick us off into discussion.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Bickerstaff, a research associate at CCRC, and I actually wanted to check in with Jenny. Should we take a pause for some Q&A? And if so, I wonder, John, maybe we could have the next slide up, which has some resources for folks to, and then we'll come back to the discussion questions. Does that sound okay, Jenny?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. There's some discussion going on in the chat, but I'm wondering if there's anybody that would like to unmute and ask a question or raise your hand. This is a lot of information. Just fascinating to take it in. And what I love is that even though it's a lot of information, it really is so clearly all related to each other. Everything, I mean, everything is all of this stuff is clearly what is important in every way to keep students moving along those pathways.
Scott, do you have a question or a comment that you would like to pose? Scott Behrens.
Yes, for Hannah, I'd like to know what kind of data is behind getting students right into a course within their program, because although I love the idea, I find very often that courses within program are courses that very often students aren't ready for in terms of success. And so I really like to try to steer students in this first semester towards towards classes they're going to be most likely successful in. It protects their SAT and also gives them a positive feeling towards education. And I'll give you a good example. In one of my previous institutions, I was talking to a counselor who would put a student in micro and macro as their first two courses. And it was obvious they were going to fail it, but it was under that guise of let's get them into something in their program. But clearly classes that most freshmen are not prepared for. And so I'd like to know the research behind it.
Yeah, I agree that it is important to not to give students some positive motivation in their first term. I think Davis has done research on this. I think he's well positioned to address this question.
Well, it's not necessarily a course in the program of study. Obviously, if you're going for a nursing program, you're not going to be taking nursing courses. It's a program that will light the students' fire for learning. And this, you know, I know there's a humanities initiative going on. This is where humanities or CTE, cool stuff, and CTE folks do this really well. So the question is, and I noticed the Michigan transfer folks identified 4 to 10 courses that students to take early on. So if I were a college, and we want the students to get on these Michigan transfer things, which are these structured pre-transfer paths that John's talking about, we know those are more effective. I would say, okay, what courses are those and who's teaching them? And do we have our best, are we supporting those teachers? Do we have our best, most dynamic teachers there? Because we're losing so many students from the start. But that's why it seems simplistic, but take a look at what courses students are taking early on, and we're not seeing them take humanities course. Or maybe students are interested in nursing, deviant psychology. That was a great course I took in, or a Psych 101 course taught, it doesn't have to be customized toward nursing, but with an understanding that, well, a lot of your students are in nursing programs. So but it's still Psych 101, right? Or Social 101. So this is really what we're saying, because in many cases, you're right. Even with these foundation courses like macro, those are going to be tough courses early on. On the other hand, we really underestimate what students can do. We've seen this in Dev Ed, which in my view is the bigotry of low expectations. We do have to support these faculty, though, in these one-on-one courses, because yes, these students haven't had rich learning, what we're talking about is learning that makes them think. They don't like to do it. They haven't had it in high school, but this is the thing that's going to serve them best, along with a degree in the workforce and in life. And it's the key that research shows that once you light that confidence in learner, especially among students who've been told they're not good at learning, you've really put students on a path, and they're really on their way. The last thing I'll say is that one of the 101 things about good teaching is for faculty to do in the first day or two low stakes diagnostic testing to see where students are. And if a student is in macro and I'm a faculty teaching macro, I can identify if the student really is not ready. And then, let's find that student some support. It's still the first week of class. Let's do due process and make sure that we're, doing this. But I think this is much fairer, and the research would show than, relying on some stupid inaccurate placer test score or, some more generic tests.
Huge fan of your work, sir. Thank you for your answer.
Huge fan of your guys' work. This stuff's easy to talk about. Oh yeah. Teach the kid, teach the student who's coming out of the Michigan schools, a rich humanities course. Students aren't used to writing. They're not used to thinking, but this is hard work.
Other questions?
I just have a comment. Davis and John, they said a lot of great things, but the one word that really hit home with me is alignment. So I was a part-time professor until about 3 or 4 years ago. Macomb asked me to be program coordinator of the architecture, construction, and civil engineering surveying. And as an adjunct, I thought, well, I'm just going to go in and do 1 or 2 classes. Well, then I found out that it was really a bigger picture. This alignment of the college mission, the alignment of the classes, the assessment. I had to really look at it in a bigger picture to be able to reach out to the universities and say, hey, we've changed. We updated these classes so that they connect with industry. So, connecting with industry now, I have companies that are calling me all the time because they see what we're doing, because I reached out to them more to use that alignment with high schools and universities and industry and workforce development, credit for prior learning, all of those things. It's really alignment is the I think the key to bringing it all together and being able to light the fire to say, hey, what we're doing here in the classroom is exactly what you'll be doing at this job. And let's go to that job and see that you are doing that same thing and give them the confidence to say, this active learning is happening here. I could go over here and do the same thing and get paid for it. So it was an eye opener for me 3 or 4 years ago when I thought I was just going to start with 1 class, but no, the alignment of everything and all of the opportunities for students really make a difference in the bigger picture. So before we can really get those students on board, the programs themselves have to be strong enough to give them that opportunity, I think, and bring them
Right
in.
on, Janice. I mean, this is what community colleges do. You guys are the great elevators. It's why you're so underfunded, because people know that you're, anyhow, I won't get political, but, privileged people like us with education, we can provide, connections. We know that woman who owns this architectural design firm and get our kid. But what you're doing is, for most of your students who probably don't come from families, you're providing that kind of connections. And by the way, employers want to see someone come out of community college who not only has a good broad education, but knows how to do stuff, unlike students coming out of the universities, especially the prestigious ones who are smart, but they don't know how to do anything.
Yeah, I have students actually from those universities coming back to Macomb. I actually have a master's degree from one of those universities, but
okay. No, I don't want to knock the university. Yeah.
No. And I've taught with them too, but I just wanted to say that alignment is so important for the students, just to be able to connect and transfer in all different ways. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to go? Should we head back to Sue to give us an opportunity to talk more in smaller groups?
Sounds great. Thanks, John, for putting the slide up. So these discussion questions, we brainstormed, the CCRC and Jenny and her team brainstormed these in conjunction together to provide you all an opportunity to talk about some of the big themes from today's presentation. So the first 2 questions, if you can think way back to Davis's slide that had 4 principles on it, the bottom 2 bubbles were looking at academic communities and those experiential active learning strategies. So our first 2 questions here are intended to sort of get the conversation going on what's happening and how we could improve. The first question asks, how do we build a sense of academic and career community in our discipline that will engage, retain, and complete students in our program? So how do we help students feel like they're joining something and they're having a rich experience that feels relevant to some academic goal that they have beyond the community college or a career goal? And then the second is around this light the fire learning experience. I've also heard it talked about in terms of keeping students' fires going, that students are coming to community college with a passion, and that these courses should, build on that and reaffirm the interest that the students already have. So you'll see in the second question where we talk about collaboration across fields for this, because as Davis has said, maybe that Light the Fire course is a humanities course, regardless of the student's program of study, or maybe it's a course within the student's program that will really help them see those workforce connections. And I really appreciate Scott's question about sort of getting into a little bit more about what that first term experience might be if it's not a program course. And then we presented a number of tools today. There was the Program Explorer Excel tool that John mentioned. Hannah mentioned a couple of interesting practices, for example, looking at students' enrollments in their first term and just sort of seeing at your college, what are students enrolling in their first term? Does it look like high school? Does it look like it would be engaging? And also the tool on the website for the planning exercises for onboarding. And you may be familiar with other resources through your ongoing guided pathways work that you could reflect on here. But just sort of thinking about maybe some next steps and some tools that might advance your work, as Jenny said, and taking the guided pathways work you all are doing to that next level. So I think Jenny has some instructions for getting into the groups, and Katie has very kindly put these questions in the chat, so you'll have them available.
So in order to see the questions in the chat when you go to your breakout room, you need to open the chat pane now. If you have not got the chat open, open it up. And then you'll be able to see the questions when you go into your breakout room. So that is the main thing that I wanted to tell you. We're going to take about 12 to 15 minutes to discuss these questions. So take 3 or 4 minutes on each question. It's a random breakout. So in a moment, you will see a message that inviting you to join a room, and go ahead and do so and dive right in. And then we'll come back for a quick debrief and fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. Let me just share my screen again. I've got just some not particularly interesting slides to close with, but you know, hey, they're there. So welcome back from the breakout rooms. And I'm going to invite Sue from CCRC to start off any kind of, you know, what I'm not going to ask everybody from somebody from every room to say something, but I want to just actually have Sue kick us off with what was interesting in your room, and have people just jump in as they are moved. How does that work?
That sounds great. Yeah, our room, we talked about a number of things. One thing that stood out to me was this idea of, you know, this academic community and what it means to be in a program and to get into a program, and particularly the alignment with workforce and the needs of the workforce, and the ways that students can kind of see those direct connections. I also heard a really interesting example at the high school level of high school students taking courses, for example, a chemistry course that maybe has a health science component to it, so that even some of these interests can be sort of students can start to explore their interests at the high school level. So that was an interesting example, and one that seems like it could easily translate to the community college. So maybe if we can think about the sharing around these two main ideas, building that academic community, and then the instructional or curricular dimensions of what it means to have a Light the Fire experience, and just open it up to any ideas on either of those topics.
One thing that was kind of interesting that came up in our room is that oftentimes these Light the Fire experiences seem to happen kind of accidentally. That the challenge that we're going to be faced with in building this sense of community, that particularly that Davis was talking about, to light the fire for students, we need to figure out how to do that intentionally, how to do those things that seem to happen spontaneously, where you click with someone or you click with a certain group on a certain day. How can we make sure that that happens more intentionally so that we can make that experience available to more students?
Jenny, on those lines, my group talked a little bit about raising capacity and empowering faculty, particularly in workforce programs, who are not always as invited to the table for some of these experiences as their full-time, I guess, counterparts are, or just the different cultures between and among different kinds of programs, and how can we empower faculty and get people thinking creatively about what light the fire means. Because I think we talk about those courses that are light the fire experiences, but there are other experiences that can serve to light a student's fire, and people have an individual impact on that. And like you said, if we could systematize that in such a way so that it wasn't ad hoc or accidental, there would be a lot of benefit there.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked about how a lot of our students, most of our students significantly now are part-time, and that creates a time crunch to do things like this. We either focus on, some of the momentum measures like getting folks into their math and English classes, or something like this. So we talked about the benefit maybe of looking at this as a co-curricular opportunity as well, and look at a large pathways group and create sort of meta interest groups that folks are able to identify with, to meet some people and develop some relationships with, that might improve their motivation and the stickiness of the experience that they're having while they're on campus.
Absolutely. And the kind of the virtual world, we talked a little bit about this too, the virtual world offers some scope for that maybe we don't have if we were thinking specifically about the idea that you have to have, you have to meet a group at a certain place at a certain time. People have to travel to get there. People need babysitters, things like that. Whereas in these virtual connections can happen a little bit more easily. And you can bring in more media, more multimedia and things like that we talked a little bit about. Todd talked a little bit about the success they've had at Jackson with their pathway showcases when they moved to virtual. I don't know if Todd, if you want to say some more about that, if you're still here.
I am still here. I did share that I thought it was a blessing in disguise when we moved to virtual, and we built ourselves up for having large groups of students come in at the synchronous meeting time, and to be able to interact directly with faculty, and that really didn't happen across the board. But ironically, I think all of our work in online and getting more comfortable with technology that all of us have been doing over the last year had faculty create some really wonderful video introductions to their maybe a program within that pathway, or to their whole department or whatever it was. And those were found to be very valuable by students. And we could, of course, track and follow how many of them were being viewed, and by how many students within the first year seminar program. So it turned out to be a great blessing, and I think we're never going to let go of that portion of it for the future.
Terrific. And just before I'm gonna, is there anybody else who's got something burning that they want to share? Because we are almost at time, and I had just a couple more things to say. And don't get in between me and leaving this meeting, I think is what I'm hearing silently from everyone on the screen. Okay, so I just wanted to remind you that this was the first in a series of 4 webinars, so please plan to join us 4 weeks from now, where we will talk about the role of state and local labor market data, and then in April credentials, and faculty, a kind of a how do you empower faculty to do these kind of this kind of intentional construction of experiences that connect students to programs and possibilities. MCCA events page again is your friend, and here's us, and I appreciate you guys, and thank you to all of our presenters from CCRC. This was fantastic. We look forward to diving more deeply into some of these topics as the months go by, and look forward to seeing all of you soon. Stay safe and warm on this snowy, icy Michigan weekend.